Speaking of over-reliance on private contracts where you have to pay for shareholders and directorial salaries, Labour is eyeing public-private funding for the NHS. PFI Part 2 Electric Boogaloo. Let's go. Let's go, chat. Everything that we told you would happen. Members of the centrist brigade who said that Starmer would never engage in more NHS privatisation, despite the fact that West Streeting was clear in the run-up to the election that they would hold the door wide open for the private sector. And they've already increased private sector subcontraction already. And now we're going to bring back the literal worst policy ever from the Blair administration outside of their foreign policy by bringing back PFIs. Isn't it nice having the adults back in the room? Isn't it nice having the sensible party in charge? We got the Tories out, chat. The Tories are gone. We got the Tories out, and everything is fine now, and the NHS is definitely safe in the hands of Rachel Reeves and West Streeting. Ministers will make a final decision in the autumn budget about whether to use the funding approach, which was put on pause 8 years ago. But critics say lessons have been not learned about the pitfalls of PPPs and the point to the chaos unleashed by the 2018 collapse of the mega contractor Carillion with its complex portfolio of projects. Yes, because when you subcontract out to people in the private sector, they have to pay for directorial salaries and shareholders, and they try and cut costs in the outside of the interest of social utility because their single goal is profit, right? They want to make money. They're not there for the good of the country. While it was originally conceived under the Conservatives, Tony Blair's Labour government made significant use of the Private Finance Initiative, a form of PPP used to build schools, hospitals and other public infrastructure without adding to the national debt. Backers of PFI say this approach allowed public infrastructure to be built that otherwise would not exist, but opponents say the taxpayer was often left footing huge bills for inflexible contracts that ran for as long as 30 years, which is the latter being correct, obviously, because they could have existed just by doing public money. There was no reason to not just spend money in terms of engaging in capital investment, because that's what this is. Like, PFI replaced capital investment. It didn't replace day-to-day spending. So it was stuff that you could quite easily justify actually spending public debt on, because the interest that you'd pay on public debt and the overall cost of the contract would be lower if you just issued a fucking bond than if you got a whole PFI contract. It's better value to do state investment. Oh, but that might put interest rates up, and think of the mortgage holders, which was the only people who mattered under the Blair administration, right? Those pieces of public infrastructure could absolutely have existed by engaging in bond issuance during the Blair administration. You did not need PFI. All you did was have a worse funding model just to please the bond vigilantes and mortgage holders in the country at the expense of literally every other taxpayer. Yet another way in which the Blair administration screwed over the people who are on the lower end of the income spectrum, because those are more likely to be renters, in the interest of people on the higher end of the income spectrum who are more likely to be homeowners. Because the working people who are also renting are now paying higher taxes now to pay off PFI contracts so that they could ensure that existing homeowners then had lower mortgage rates and could pay less tax to the Blair government at the time. So the homeowners of the Blair administration have been subsidised by renters now, which I find incredibly tilting. And this is what this new Labour government is planning to do in future too, with the introduction of more PFIs for these health centres. Really great video by a channel that talks about road infrastructure, that there was a form of PFI which essentially meant that you got a private company to build part of a road, and then you put a detector on that part of the road, and every time a car passed over and used the road that they'd paid for, they got paid a fee by the highway agency, called DBFO contracts, and they are the dumbest shit you've ever seen in your life, where we are endlessly, infinitely paying money from our roads budget to a private company that built a section of the A1M 25 fucking years ago. Automated toll road, exactly, those are the ones, and it's a silent toll road because you do not know that you're driving on a toll road because you're paying for it with road tax rather than being paid for it by paying the toll when you use it. You're being subsidised by people who don't use that road. Treasury data shows that 560 PFI contracts are outstanding in England for projects including schools, hospitals, libraries and road maintenance. Hundreds of these contracts will be ending in the coming years, raising questions about the state of the assets being inherited by the taxpayer and potentially triggering legal battles about the precise conditions of the handback. Again, do you have to get into these legal troubles either? Like, just have a state-owned company that's doing it. Just get the state to do it. Why are we relying on private companies for everything when they've proven they don't care about societal utility? especially when the Tories do it and they're giving hand shandies to their mates rather than getting good value for money. A report last year from the Associations of Infrastructure Investors and Public-Private Partnerships, chaired by the Labour peer and former frontbencher John Hutton, warned of the risk of serious disruption as these deals come to an end, amid what is called mistrust between the parties to some PFI contracts. Rachel Reeves will be under no illusions about the pitfalls of PPP, having chaired the House of Commons Business Select Committee when MPs examined the fate of Carillion, which was enmeshed in a number of PFI deals, as well as being a direct contractor to the government. So she knows it's bad. Rachel Reeves knows that it's bad, and she's signing off on it anyway. Great. Thank you. Brilliant. Guess because bond yields are going up and they can't engage in any more expansionary policy without halting the reduction in interest rates, which probably can't go much lower now that inflation is 3.8%, which we'll cover later on in the stream, although I think the concerns are overblown here. So they are essentially hamstringing themselves, again by the fiscal rules, to engaging in PFIs. The government is under pressure to transform the UK's crumbling public services, with limited resources and recent announcements that have made clear that ministers are ready to dip their toe into this controversial area. If there are real resources that you can mobilise, you do not need the private sector to do this. You can spend money by the state. Anything that we can do, we can afford. We do not need to get really shitty value for money by wanting a private company to do it when the government could finance it themselves. It just might not look as good in terms of getting interest rates down. And it just shows you, right, insofar as I have talked a lot on this channel about why the Conservative Party's reputation as being the party of fiscal prudence is entirely undeserved, you know? They've always been terrible at managing the economy. But because the Labour Party need to look like they're good at managing the economy, they make shit decisions in the same way that the Tories would. In some respects, because a lot of them are just Tories in red ties, but even the ones who aren't Tories in red ties make Tory decisions because they appear to look like good policy because the Tories do it, even though it's shit policy. And the PFIs are so bad that the Tories won't even do it themselves. Like, Tories don't even do PFIs. That's how shit they are. And the Labour Party, which has historically been better at managing the economy than the Tories have, are going to continue to do it even though they know that it's shit. Rachel Reeves, the person who's intimately aware about the failure of Carillion, is here saying let's do more of it so that we can keep interest rates low. For ministers because they don't have to do any fucking work, plus they'll get a kickback later down the road, and if anything does go wrong, they can blame the private company, they can blame the outsourcer, rather than being democratically accountable to the failure of any project or any amount of management, because people are far less likely to blame the procurer of the private contract than the people actually undertaking the private contract themselves. So there are both political and economic reasons for this. The 10-year infrastructure strategy published in June said that the government would explore the feasibility of using new PPP models for taxpayer-funded projects, for example in decarbonising the public sector estate and in certain types of primary care and community health infrastructure in very limited circumstances where they could represent value for money. I mean, if it's very limited and you are very, 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 very shrewd in ensuring value for money, then I can understand why they think they can get away with at least some of this. I have zero confidence that A, it won't go tits up like it did before and it'll be terrible value for money, and the product that gets produced by these private companies won't be a crock of shit that was a waste of money in the first place. And B, I also have no confidence in this government being able to ensure that that condition is met, i.e. value for money. I have zero confidence that Rachel Reeves or Wes Streeting will be getting health centre contracts done in a efficient and cost-effective manner. That is true. Like, the Tories did do PFIs originally when it was John Major. That was the first government that really started PFIs, but they were accelerated by the Tony Blair administration and basically stopped by the Tories from 2010 onwards, mostly because they didn't want to spend any money anyway, because it would involve there being at least any amount of state infrastructure, which the Tories really didn't want to do. George Osborne just wanted to strip back the state and didn't want to engage in anything that might stop that, even if it did benefit private companies. That's how ideological they were. But also it was shit, and so they stopped it because it was bad when John Major and when Blair did it. And you know they'll outsource the contract negotiations to a big consultancy firm, wasting more money, despite promising to slash government expenditure on consultancies. It was one of their big pitches in the Labour conference, was ditching the money spent on consultancies. The problem, of course, right? The big problem that Labour have is that they spent all their time in opposition thinking about what sounded good rather than what was applicable, or indeed what they were qualified to do. So when it comes to things like overspending on consultancies, which they said in the run-up to the election that they would cut, once they've gotten into government and actually have to engage in real governance, they've realised that all the Labour ministers haven't got a fucking clue what they're doing. None of these people have any clue about how to engage in basic governance anyway, because a lot of these people are being government ministers for the first time because they've been in the political wilderness for so long. But even then, they also have no professional or public service experience that maps onto the new departments anyway. So they have so little experience, so little know-how in running these departments, they're having to outsource their decision-making to consultancies anyway. So despite promising not to do so, because they thought it's fine, we'll just get in and cut the consultancies, they've realised that they also don't have a clue about how to run those fucking services, so they're getting consultancies in anyway, which is a big pledge that's been broken. Rosie Collington and Mariana Mazzucato, they must both be absolutely tearing their hair out over this over-reliance on consultancies, which is down the line from the fact that government ministers in the Labour government just do not have a fucking clue. I mean, look at Peter Kyle. He's my new nemesis, by the way, chat. I hope you know this. Peter Kyle, I'm coming for you. Only Haig had a clue and they got rid of her. Literally, the only minister who knew anything about her brief, other than Ed Miliband, who's good at his job. Like, I'm not an Ed Miliband hater. I'm part of the Miller fandom for my sins, you know? But the only other minister that actually understood her brief properly, who was properly educated on her brief and had done the work to prepare for governance, was Lou Haig. And they got rid of her for accurately calling out P&O Ferries, DP World, as being a rogue operator. She was right. And yet she was fired because she wasn't being nice enough to the big corporate fucking masters. Just, honestly, this fucking government, chat. And again, we could have a public consultancy like the Danish are trialling, but of course that would involve the government doing something. It's too Corbyn coded, so the Labour government can't do it. Scotland and Wales have developed their own alternative approaches to public-private partnerships called the non-profit distributing partnerships and the mutual investment model, respectively. Aaron Jones, Chief Secretary to the Treasury, says that receiving PPP in England could allow us to do more quicker and that you would otherwise be able to do, which is what they said internally, remember, in the run-up to the election of UK infrastructure rebuilt by BlackRock. What was it? Let me find that quote. Open Democracy covered the links between the UK government and asset management firm BlackRock. BlackRock CEO Larry Fink made a star turn at Labour's investment summit in October and posed for pictures with the Prime Minister when he visited New York in September. Senior BlackRock figures also attended a summer reception for business leaders at Number 10, as Open Democracy has revealed previously. This is from a letter between BlackRock and the Labour government. As you know, we also share the government's view that infrastructure investment can play a critical role in improving economic growth and productivity. We believe infrastructure is poised to become one of the fastest growing segments in private markets globally. Yeah, but because neoliberalism has put all of these continually revenue generating things that are critical to the functioning of society in the hands of unaccountable private ownerships and private equity firms, to the detriment of literally everybody, rather than having it owned by the state, right? Like, there's a reason why people like Macquarie, who are the Australian asset management firm, had their tendrils inside so much of our water industry, because they know that it's a captive market and a natural monopoly, and it is an inelastic market, so that they get guaranteed returns because you can't do without water, just in the same way you can't do without healthcare and you can't do without infrastructure. This is why asset management firms want to get in on the infrastructure investment and ownership, because they know that it's continual returns. It is essentially an infinite money glitch. As our chairman and CEO Larry Fink has recently written, private capital market financing combined with policy pragmatism are necessary to meet countries' infrastructure needs and thereby enhance economic growth and productivity. We would welcome the opportunity to meet with you to discuss our work on funding the project and enterprises that drive the economy and building the UK's case as an investment destination. We will work with your team to get this meeting in the diary. Until then, congratulations on your appointment. Cutting through the corporate glaze, we can roughly understand that the point being made here, in effect, BlackRock is highlighting that Labour's entire political project rests on the willingness of companies like BlackRock to plough private capital into the financial components of our society and extracting massive profits in the process. Reynolds' reply to BlackRock, when it eventually came in August, gushed with praise for the firm and the wider financial services sector. Partnership with the financial services sector will be critical to developing and delivering on our industrial strategy and supporting small businesses. If it's being done by private fucking capital, then it's not an industrial strategy, it's just private investment, Jonathan. The sector underpins UK investment in trade, and its continued success is critical to lay the strong foundations for economic growth that this country needs. I would like to thank you for your long-standing investment in the UK and partnership in driving growth, jobs and innovation. BlackRock has an impressive reach, driving investment into the UK across sectors of our economy, and your work is vital to economic growth. Funding our priority projects and investment infrastructure is an important part of this. So, literally, there are letters between the, quite frankly, evil BlackRock investment firm and Jonathan Reynolds, current business secretary, essentially where he says that it is an important part of their priority projects that BlackRock fund them. Do you think that they won't try and get their greasy little tendrils inside the NHS? Or inside these new PPPs into health centres that the government wants to tender potentially contracts for? Postcard. In January this year, BlackRock announced it would purchase Global Infrastructure Partners, which controls around $170 billion worth of assets worldwide, including Gatwick Airport and Hornsea 1, a project to build the world's largest offshore wind farm in the North Sea. This purchase, which was completed last month, reportedly makes BlackRock the second largest asset manager in the infrastructure space after the vampire kangaroo Macquarie. There you go. See, I just knew. No pre-watch, or no pre-read, I guess, in this case. It's these people are parasites. They're vampires. And what do you think? Again, I mentioned the pitfalls of the failures of messaging and communications on green policy that would lead to people pushing back against a concerted effort to try and make our economy climate conscious, is if it's not looking like it's being done in the interest of the people. And whilst there is a problem with the just transition and people losing their jobs, it is also going to be a real problem when the conspiracy theorists get a hand of it. Because the conspiracy theorists think that there's a Legion of Doom trying to own the country rather than private capital with private interests wanting to make money, which is a systemic problem of capitalism, especially neoliberal capitalism, right? If they hear something like offshore wind farms are owned by BlackRock, you know that the conspiracy alarm bells are going to go off. It's not good for getting people invested in the green energy transition if they think the beneficiaries of that are going to be asset management firms and the Green Finance Institute rather than the public purse. Which is why it was such a both economic and political disaster that Rachel Reeves, who got money in the bank account, or I guess she got money in her electoral fund from the Green Finance Institute, mysteriously, after meeting with the GFI Davos, another friend of the conspiracy theorists, dropped their plan for 28 billion of public investment in green infrastructure and slashed it down to 4.7 billion, and they're going to get the rest of it, so 3/4 of that investment, from the private sector through green finance. Weird that. It's weird how that works. Rachel Reeves goes to Davos, meets a person who does green private financing. She convinces her to go more private rather than public funding and ownership for these green projects. And then this person gets a bunch of private investment opportunities in the green sector and is put onto their fucking Climate Action Council, along with her previous employer, Barclays. And the worst possible thing is if people think that the Green Finance Institute are buying off politicians to try and get favourable government policy, and that the ownership of important critical infrastructure that is necessary for the green transition. I want Hornsea 1, I want offshore wind, I want onshore wind, I want solar panels, I want tidal power, I want pump storage hydroelectricity, I want nuclear, I want all of these things, but they should be publicly owned so that the revenue goes back to the state for the interest of the public purse, and not being owned by international asset management firms taking the money we pay them in bills and putting it offshore. Because that's what's going to happen, right? That's what's going to happen if they engage in PFIs. Argue that when asset managers own significant chunks of infrastructure, their priority is their investors, rather than society or even the planet. The primary purpose of infrastructure, the argument goes, becomes the generation of profit rather than providing a working, reliable service, again, which will provide profits elsewhere for the businesses that social infrastructure will help facilitate. In practice, this might mean cutting investment whilst raising prices. In simple terms, the government's plans to use public funds to de-risk private investment means the taxpayer takes on much of the risk involved, while the private sector stands to reap most of the benefits, which is what will happen with these PPP contracts for the NHS. This is particularly true of essential infrastructure, such as healthcare, which the government cannot let fail, and so must step in to cover losses in the event that something goes wrong. Ideological, who's a great economist who you should all follow, said that this doesn't only make it harder to bring public goods back into public ownership, it also allows big finance to tighten the grip on the social contract with citizens and to become the ultimate arbiter of climate, energy and welfare politics, which will have profound distributional, structural and political consequences. And it's these political consequences that I mentioned before about the conspiracy theory stuff. Again, if BlackRock own all of the stuff, People will think that it's about like social control. They already have these conspiracy theories about things like the World Economic Forum, as if, again, they are anything other than private capitalists who want to make money for private capital, which is what BlackRock are. They are an asset management firm. They are private capitalists wanting to make private capital money. There is no more complex than that, right? They want to own things. They want to own stuff because it makes them money, not because they're a secret cabal of evil people who want to take over the world. It's really simple, I promise you. If you're a conspiracy theorist who's watching. Because I hate the World Economic Forum too, but I hate them because I'm a socialist and they're capitalists. It's as simple as that. And it will put the green future in jeopardy if a future reform government can go, we're cancelling these green contracts because it's being done to benefit the financial services sector, the green finance institutes of the world, or BlackRock. It'll be a very easy sell to both the people who hate net zero and the people who hate the private equity markets and people who cross over both of those categories. Really easy sell, and that will put the green transition at risk. And be worse for the public too. Exactly, it's socializing risk and privatizing profit. Again, people try and tell me, people try and say to me, the Labour government, they're not neoliberal, right? When de-risking private capital by socializing the risk is fundamental to neoliberalism. Fundamental to neoliberalism. Just because the previous form of neoliberalism benefited the private sector through public investment by selling those publicly owned assets to them. In lieu of those private assets existing to sell off, you have to use public money to de-risk them by ensuring that the risk is taken on by the state rather than the private capital. And that's been happening for ages. It's just being done to a greater extent. Now that A, there were fewer services to sell off, and B, the government finances are far less stable than they were when interest rates were low. So Darren Jones is clear that the PPP, or reworked PFI contracts, will include neighbourhood health centres, which are meant to transform NHS care by shifting more treatment out of hospitals. The NHS 10-year plan made a commitment to develop a business case for the use of public-private partnerships for neighbourhood health centres ahead of a final decision in the autumn budget. When the NHS 10-year plan was launched, Unison's General Secretary Christina McAnea warned, basing any funding on a failed market system and expensive private finance model would be a major error, especially with money so tight. True. Like, when Unison is saying bad things about the Labour government's plans, you know shit's off, right? By no means are Unison like a scab union or a bad union. I just think they're far more Labour-friendly. They're less willing to call out Labour than Unite are, or the CWU are, for example. Or ASLEF, right? They're not like a proper melt union like USDA or GMB, but they're just very Labour-friendly. So if Christina McAnea is coming out swinging on this one, then you know that it's bad. You know that it's bad. This is a crazy stat. I did not know this, chat. I did not know this. The legacy of previous waves of public-private partnership is complex. Research this year by the economist Max Mosley, same name, different person, then at the National Institute of Economic and Social Research, looked at 1,000 schools built through PFI. It found that £13.5 billion was being spent at a local level on repayments, 31% of which was going on interest. 31%! 31%! If these were just done using fucking government bonds, it would be infinitely cheaper. Like, bond yields haven't really gone above like 5% in the last 25 years or whatever. 31% on interest alone. Genuinely fucking mind-boggling. We're getting wongered. We literally are getting wongered. Because of public-private partnerships argue that the assets being handed back to the public sector when decades-long contracts come to an end are in better condition than crumbling public buildings whose upkeep has been left to the taxpayer. Except that's just nonsense, because the money spent is paid at a higher interest rate than it would be if you just issued a fucking bond. A recent National Audit Office report on the use of public-private partnerships to fund public infrastructure called for a series of changes, including better sharing of risks between taxpayers and investors, because up to this point it was only the state that had any risk in any of this. Departments should assess risks, determine who is best placed to bear them, and design agreements that clearly establish the corresponding risk allocation, said one recommendation. Just have the state own it. I'm sorry, like, it's public infrastructure. What's the risk? Right, so there's a quote here that we're reading down in the article from John Hutton, who chairs the Association of Infrastructure Investors in the Public-Private Partnerships, AIIP, and he's a former frontbencher and Labour peer. So let's have a look at this definitely 100% transparent pressure group and lobby group, and have a look into the background of both him and his group. Let's have a look. First up, let's look at the AIIP, right? Founded in 2023, we bring together major investors to build stronger infrastructure, smarter partnerships, and sustainable public services across the UK. With significant oversight of Britain's PFI portfolio, our members coordinate directly with central stakeholders, including the government, the Infrastructure Project Authority, and government departments. So he's literally there, Lord Hutton, to represent people who have a financial interest in getting PFI contracts, which we know are shit. So this is a former Labour frontbencher and current member of the House of Lords, unelected legislator for fucking life, lobbying for the interests of private companies to get terrible contracts such as PFIs to rip off the state. Okay? Let's have a look at John Hutton, shall we? He went to Malden College, Oxford. Of course, it's another Oxbridge alumnus who is a Labour frontbencher who gets thrown into the House of Lords. He was a legal advisor for the Confederation of British Industry, so another lobbying institution for the private sector. Hutton was appointed as non-executive director of Pearson Engineering, a subsidiary of state-owned Israeli weapons manufacturer Rafael, in 2022. The Labour Party in Israel are fucking inseparable. You couldn't make it up. Like, you literally couldn't make it up. The current members of our legislature are non-executive directors of subsidiaries of state-owned weapons manufacturers for a country that's currently committing genocide. How monstrous do these Labour individuals have to be? Not only did he ruin the country by being part of the government that introduced PFIs in the first place, he's now coming back to lobby for the interests of private companies to rip the state off with new PFI contracts in the future, and he still is a non-executive director of a company that profits from genocide. And he was on the board of a private infrastructure firm in the United States. Our political class are straight up crooks. It's so true. It's so true. Ooh, Register of Interests. That's a good one. Political advisor to Birmingham City Council Commissioners. Oh, so the people fucking over the bin strikers. Love it. Luton Airport Operating Company Limited. So another piece of privately owned infrastructure that should be publicly owned. Non-executive director at Scottish Power. Is that private or public? Nope. It's private. Literally, he is also a non-executive director of a privately owned public infrastructure firm in the form of Scottish Power. It's owned by a fucking Spanish multinational electricity company. As of 2023, the largest shareholder of the company is the Qatar Investment Authority, with BlackRock and Norge Bank, manager of the Norwegian government pension fund Global, are also holding significant interests. Right. So he is a chair of a PFI lobbying firm who is a non-executive director of a firm that profits from genocide owned by the government of the country committing genocide. He used to also be a lawyer for a lobbying group for the private industrial sector, who was also on the board of a nuclear energy infrastructure company for the private sector and a energy infrastructure company owned by a Spanish conglomerate that is mostly funded by BlackRock and Qatar. You couldn't make it up. On top of this, he's also advising the commissioners who are fucking over the bin strikers in Birmingham. Every day, you think that you've found all of the people in this government that are awful, and then another one just crops up to be a fucking monster. Right, let's get back to the article. Right, let's have a look at the quote from this guy who's definitely not got a conflict of interest here. Thank you for the memberships, guys. Hutton said that despite the myths, quote unquote, PFI had delivered hundreds of schools, hospitals, and health centres that would never have otherwise been built with ring-fence maintenance, or they could have been built with public money. He added, public-private partnerships operate in every other Western economy. By applying the lessons learned and harnessing technology to reduce complexity and avoid disputes, public-private partnerships can rebuild our vital public services with buildings that will stand for decades to come. Just because other people do them doesn't mean that it's good. It doesn't mean that it's a good thing to do. Just a thought. Like, all the other countries have gotten rid of public investment in favour of neoliberalism, apart from the Scandinavian countries. I'm not sure that they're good models to govern by, given how shit it's been for us. Labour has set up a new body, the National Infrastructure and Service Transformation Authority, to be the government's centre of expertise on these issues, though sceptics argue that it's more of a rebranding exercise than a significant beefing up of resource, and given the connection between all of the people in the Labour government, as we've seen, who have connection to the firms who stand to gain, all of the lobbyists who just litter the Labour benches, as Noara Media reported on quite a while back now before the election, of the potential candidates who were coming through who'd been essentially given a free run at selection in a lot of cases. I think that this quango, as has been rightly pointed out, to ensure that we get a centre of expertise on public-private partnerships, I'm sure they're definitely not going to be entirely beholden to the people who stand to gain in the private sector from this money. Hey there, if you enjoyed the video, make sure that you like and leave a comment. That helps the video out in the algorithm. If you subscribe and ring the bell, it'll let you know when I go live. I stream every day on YouTube and Twitch. You can also follow all of my socials down in the description. And if you want to support me in a more financial manner, there's a join button for memberships. It's just 99p to be a member on YouTube, as well as a Patreon, and there's some merch there as well. And hopefully I'll catch you on the next video. Take care.